A thorough reading of geometric proofs in Euclid's Elements should suffice to train the mind well in the rigors of a clear demonstration. My husband memorized the first 6 books of the Elements to great effect, and then read only a few of the other great books. Such a foundation proved sufficient to guide his kindly providences to the White House itself. Why not rely on a smattering of reading that can be fit in while one is not chopping wood or some other useful task, rather than devoting the bulk of a child's youthful strength to reading?
The geometry found in Euclid's Elements is probably one of the most critical texts to understanding the great books. Without Euclid, a study of the great books often dissolves into a more narrow literature program. Yet logical rigor and a fine ability to create a sound argument are not the only benefits to reading the great books. The great books offer an individual the opportunity to become acquainted with a broad scope of human thinking as it is played out through the drama that is Western history. The books carry a long line of thought through history that is best studied chronologically and with some rigor. However, chopping wood between books can be highly beneficial for dispelling any lethargy excessive reading might have caused in a young student.
Why would anyone in their right mind have young children reading books like Homer? Do you think you are being clever to tiptoe around the obvious filth contained in such literature? Children cannot properly differentiate allegory from truth and could easily be led into a corrupt lifestyle if their reading is not carefully censored. If they are to find good models that will guide them towards the strength of character necessary to be good citizens, can you ever be too careful in what you put in front of them? Why not have them simply sing hymns of adoration to the gods and read the fine stories of history's noble men?
Homer does present a world in which the gods are corrupt, the heroes self-serving, and the end of life culminates in a general gloom in which only minimal hopes are held out to the righteous. Yet Homer also gives us a character so charming as the pious Eumaeus who, again and again, lays down admonitions to strict morality and piety precisely because he claims those same gods expect it. How is it that Homer, whose gods are better suited to a burlesque Broadway comedy than the lofty heights of Mount Olympus, is able to present a vision of marriage as beautiful as that between Odysseus and Penelope, or a picture of shared human understanding and compassion as lovely as that shown between the bitter enemies Priam and Achilles, as they sit together and weep jointly over the common misery that war has brought upon them both? My only answer to this conundrum is the profound answer of the image of God shining forth despite the muddied waters of Homer's theology. Homer must be appreciated as the literary background of so many other great books, and yet his vision of life possesses a beauty of its own that makes our earliest epic a story of great insight and delight. Even after coming to love the beauty of Homer, Plato's concerns about him are still worthy of attention. Plato's understanding of God as morally upright, eternal, unchangeable, and all-powerful is so compelling that many church fathers often concluded that he must have been reading the Old Testament scriptures. Yet in Plato we also find much that should be censored. Plato's vision of the wisdom and purity of God is admirable. However, his claim that man can prepare himself to stand before that God through moral living and purgatorial punishments puts before man a vision of salvation that is so alluring that even the church could not resist the desire to incorporate it into its understanding of salvation, displacing the work of Christ. So, Anselm and Luther must also be read to help man see his need for the complete substitutionary work of Christ on the cross. In this meandering fashion, the conversational journey of ideas proceeds, and we are gradually drawn along, learning through each author as we go, loving what is beautiful and learning what detracts. The great books are a conversation, not a collection of ideas prepared for ready acceptance. A catechism is very helpful for many elements of education, but it does not create the same interplay of ideas that sharpen the mind like the great books do.
Reading philosophy is fine, but why read such books as Plato's Republic that confuse the naive by implying that the public good carries more importance than individual initiative. Outside of communism or the liberalism found in most American institutions of higher education, Plato's Republic is one of the worst indulgences of the statist political impulse found in Western history.
The great books are certainly not a collection of texts that have been assembled to please any particular ideology or political party. They offer many opinions and give the reader an opportunity to learn to admire a variety of perspectives and find what is truly lovely in them. This capacity can actually be a great aid in one's communal life, as we all deal with people of many persuasions. Reading the great books can even have a moderating effect on one's opinions, perhaps even allowing one to see some benefit in the pursuit of the common good through the activities of the government, and possibly even being able to accept Social Security at the end of one's life without a crisis of conscience. Putting together a consistent account of one's understanding of life is crucial. However, understanding the thought of many others will not prevent you from doing this, but it will better inform the path of thought that you choose. Most of the great books are full with metaphysical nonsense and semi-religious speculation that goes beyond the possibility of any rigorous thought or objective verification. Muddling through so many dialectical rabbit trails in the less than fertile terrain discovered in the so-called great books is an introduction into the fine art of human confusion. A good education should be structured around the knowledge found in a rigorous scientific investigation, limited to the sphere in which we can have any possible knowledge, human experience of the visible world. Speculation and faith in the beyond should be left strictly to Sunday school lessons and not allowed to creep into the sound education. The great books are the scenic route through a vast realm of speculative vistas. Certainly the world of our senses is vital to grasp, but to claim that the mind cannot properly understand anything besides the product of the senses is a claim whose boldness is only surpassed by the complete absence of any empirical verification for it. Therefore, until the physical senses can testify to the absence of any metaphysical reality, all metaphysical skepticism is hereby declared null and void. When Plato described the pursuit of philosophy, he said it was like a fish trying to understand the murky world above the surface of the water. The problems grasping the questions of philosophy were only surpassed by the certainty that the world it questioned after must exist. We have a longing for the world beyond us that most have understood to be a clear indicator of the necessity of training our minds as well as possible in order to gaze into it well. What bother with the troublesome histoire of the thought contained in all the great books? So much has been repudiated. Real knowledge comes from throwing off the rubbish of the past and laying hold of what is found true through the careful and logical analysis of the human condition. If I want to be learning to think for myself, why do I need to read so many other authors? Learning to think for oneself. I find this phrase to be empty of precise meaning. The problem with it becomes evident when we try to think of any of the other senses as being accomplished for ourselves. Do we learn to smell for ourselves or hear for ourselves? We do not speak in this fashion because it's obviously impossible to do otherwise. The only thing we can do is think for ourselves. The emphasis on thinking for oneself is actually contrary to one of the greatest benefits of thought. It helps remove us from ourselves. The worst of thought is that which is simply for ourselves. The Greeks called one who could not enter into the public nature of thought to themselves, idios, the word that gives us idiot. Thought leads us towards what is external to ourselves, and thus towards what holds us together with others as human. The public nature of thought is what creates the possibility of the open sphere of discourse. Often we say that we must learn to think for ourselves, yet that phrase does not well capture the lack of willfulness in thought. We need less thinking for ourselves and more thinking. The presumption that we can lay aside the thought of the past as it has been so far surpassed by our current understanding not only shows a lack of knowledge of the past, but a sad inability to examine the present.
Too much reading in the philosophers leads one to a heavy dependence on that whole reason. Was not the Apostle Paul correct in asking, where is the philosopher of the age? If I might graciously propose, we need more faith and less reason. So long as man foolishly depends upon his own human nature, he will have no trouble learning to reason.
Pascal was wise to observe that the glory of man is his reason, and the glory of reason is to know its limits. Faith must certainly be given its place, but the limitations of reason are best taught not simply by its condemnation, but by a rigorous training in the capacities of reason to clarify and define human existence. Further, more dangers are to be found in the great books for those who reject faith and enshrine reason than those who would walk through the lovely drama of their complex interplay found in the details of Western history. Watching the progress of the great books does not perfectly clarify the relation between reason and faith, but it certainly allows you to learn from their somewhat spicy marriage as it works itself out through their long drama. Atheists rather than Christians should fear great books education. Christian assumptions are much closer to those of Plato than Carl Sagan's. If faith is indeed our means to receive God's grace, certainly it must be primary. However, does not the entirety of our human nature show our purpose? Doesn't the fact that we possess a faculty of reason imply that we should cultivate its use? We would all rightly scold an individual who sat in a wheelchair his whole life rather than learning to use his perfectly good legs as a pitiful neglect of the responsibility to learn to use our God-given bodies. Yet would not going through life without ever attending to the skill of the mind, that is reasoning, also show that we are not attending to the responsibilities possessing a mind implies? If you have a mind, God meant for you to use it. Does not loving God imply the careful cultivation of his gifts rather than their neglect?
What do you really learn in reading the great books without a rigorous plan for an education divided into distinct subjects such as history, literature, and government? How can you know what you really have learned? Your talk of education as love seems more like a poor excuse for not carefully lecturing to your students on subjects that can be properly understood, in order that they may be examined in due time to demonstrate the full understanding of their subject matter.
Great books reading is not easily put to rigorous evaluation. Imagine a teacher asking a student, how well did you come to appreciate the vision of the good this week? When the goal is lofty, laying out mileposts for the estimation of progress can be difficult. However, the worst of great books education can simply be a pathetic exercise in the blind leading the blind from ignorance into the deep waters of intellectual presumption. When reading the great books, one needs others against which to sharpen one's understanding and talk through the ideas being grasped. Memorization and rigorous testing can certainly be an aid for particular subjects. However, learning through compulsion and frequent evaluation often only produces excellent short-term memory skills. We rarely remember what we have not discussed with pleasure. And if you would like to be a great books teacher, your greatest task is often to consider how you can bring the unwilling to consider with pleasure the ideas that they find unfamiliar.